In the rural counties of the eastern American interior, the small fieldstone smokehouse has stood for more than 200 years as a quiet documentary chamber, an outbuilding that catalogs in soot-darkened beams and salt-bleached pine the careful preservation labor that fed a household through the long months between November slaughter and the following autumn's first frost. Across the Pennsylvania Dutch Belt of Lancaster, Berks, Lebanon, and Chester counties, and southward through the limestone valleys of the Shenandoah and westward into the Big Valley of Mifflin and Juniata counties, these 12 by 14 foot and 14 by 16 foot fieldstone structures were built generally between the 1840s and the 1910s by farmer craftsmen who laid up local limestone or fieldstone in 16 to 20-inch thick walls, fitted a clay tile flue, hand-forged an iron-hanging rack on a local blacksmith's anvil, and pegged together an interior cure bench of seasoned eastern white pine on which the slaughtered hams, shoulders, bacons, and sausages of the household would be salted, sugared, peppered, and aged through the seasonal cycle. The smokehouse, like the spring house and the bake oven, was customarily a women's chronicle. The slaughter itself was a shared November and December labor performed by the men of an extended family. But the curing, the smoking, the daily turning of the hams on the cure bench, the tending of the smoke fire, and the ledger entries of weights, dates, and applications were almost universally kept by the wife and her unmarried daughters and her sisters-in-law. The chronicler of the smokehouse was almost always a woman in a plain cotton apron with a small pencil stub in her pocket and a rag-bound ledger book on a shelf above the cure bench. The continuity of the method through the second half of the 20th century was, however, not assured. Between 1947 and 1972, the commercial cured meat industry of the eastern United States transitioned almost wholly from the older dry cure method, which relied on hand-mixed salt, cane sugar, ground spices, and ambient applewood smoke, to a much faster chemical nitrate cure, which used sodium nitrite and sodium nitrate as fixative and color-stabilizing agents and reduced the cure and smoke cycle from a minimum of 7 to 9 months to a maximum of 7 to 9 days. The shift was driven by the post-war consolidation of the regional pork industry, by the rise of the supermarket display case, which required a uniform pink color and a long shelf life, and after 1967 by the Federal Meat Inspection Act and its enforcement protocols, which presumed nitrate as the safety baseline for cured pork sold across county or state lines. By the late 1960s, the older dry cure method had retreated almost entirely into the plain communities of Lancaster County District 6, of Mifflin County's Big Valley, and of a handful of Appalachian counties in West Virginia and Southwest Virginia. It survived in the smokehouses of widows and grandmothers and in the practiced hands of a small number of old order farmers who kept the cure bench and the iron rack and the applewood and hickory cordwood pile because they had never known another way. This is the documented record of one such smokehouse and one such widow. The commercial pork industry of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, between the years 1948 and 1969 was dominated at the wholesale and processing level by a single regional facility known as the Lancaster County Meat Packing Company at Manheim, situated on a 14-acre industrial parcel at the western edge of the borough of Manheim, along the right-of-way of the former Reading and Columbia branch of the Reading Railroad. The Manheim facility had been organized in October 1948 by the real family of Mountjoy, under a Pennsylvania corporate charter, capitalized at $312,000, and equipped with two stunning lines, a 40-foot scalding tank, a mechanical de-hairing drum, an evisceration trolley, a 9,800 square foot chill cooler, and a cure room of 4,400 square feet fitted out for the rapid pickle injection nitrate cure method, which had been adopted as the industry standard during the Second World War. By 1965, the Mannheim facility processed an average of 1,820 hogs per week and supplied cured ham, bacon, smoked sausage, and lard to 312 retail butcher shops and grocery accounts across a 6-county trading area stretching from York and Adams in the west to Berks and Chester in the east. The facility employed 87 production line workers, 14 office personnel, and 6 sales agents. The Federal Meat Inspection Act of 1967, passed by the 90th United States Congress and signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson on December 15th of that year, extended federal inspection authority over all meat sold across county lines within a state and required all such commercial cured pork to carry a USDA inspection seal. The 1967 Act's implementing regulations, codified at 9 CFR Parts 317 and 318, presumed sodium nitrite, or sodium nitrate, as the standard cure fixative and required laboratory documentation of any alternative cure method. The practical consequence for the older Pennsylvania Dutch dry cure tradition was severe. A plain widow who cured 4 bone-in country hams in her grandfather's smokehouse and sold one of them to a Lancaster City restaurant was, after January 1968, technically operating an unlicensed processing facility under federal jurisdiction. The Gloucestershire Old Spot Heritage Hog, a pasture foraging breed originating in the Berkeley Vale of Gloucestershire, England, in the early 1800s, and prized for its hardiness, its docility, and the deeply marbled fat of its hams, had been imported into the United States in small numbers between 1907 and 1914 by a handful of agricultural collectors, but had never achieved commercial scale. The breed was characterized by a white coat, marked with 1 to 4 large black spots across the shoulder and hip, lop ears that fell forward over the eyes, a deep-barreled body, and an unusually placid disposition that allowed sows to be pastured with small children without incident. By 1969, the registered United States Old Spot population had declined to fewer than 200 breeding animals nationwide, scattered across perhaps 18 small herds in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Virginia, and West Virginia. The breed survived almost entirely in the hands of Old Order Amish and Mennonite farmers in District 6 of Lancaster County and in the Big Valley of Mifflin County, where the slower-growing pasture foraging temperament of the Old Spot suited the small-scale subsistence farming pattern of the plain communities. The intersection of the older dry cure method, the heritage Old Spot breed, and the post-1967 federal regulatory environment created the precise conditions in which the events of this record unfolded between November of 1969 and March of 1978. In November of 1969, on an 80-acre rolling hillside 3 miles east of Bird in Hand, Pennsylvania, a 36-year-old Old Order Amish widow named Rebecca Stoltzfus laid into the worn pine cure bench of her late husband's 1898 Fieldstone Smokehouse the first 4 bone-in country hams of the post-widowhood crop year. The date recorded in the rag-bound hog-killing ledger she had inherited from her mother-in-law, Sarah Stoltzfus, was Tuesday the 11th of November, 1969. The smokehouse stood 35 feet northwest of the Cherry Hill farmhouse along the worn grass path that ran from the kitchen door past the 1847 spring house to the orchard hedge. The structure measured 12 feet by 14 feet, the fieldstone walls 18 inches thick. The single, dark green wooden door hung on hand-forged strap hinges, the clay-tiled chimney venting to the north. The interior cure bench 8 feet of seasoned eastern white pine, worn pale and slightly concave from a century of salt and sugar. A hand-forged iron hanging rack with 24 hooks ran the length of the south wall. The smokehouse had been built in the spring of 1898 by Daniel Stoltzfus's great-grandfather, Jonas Stoltzfus, the same plain patriarch who in the autumn of 1847 had laid up the limestone walls of the Cherry Hill spring house in which the dairy ledger of the household had been kept since that decade. Rebecca had been a widow 9 months. Her husband, Daniel Stoltzfus, a 38-year-old thresher and the third son of the Cherry Hill line, had been killed on the afternoon of Tuesday, the 4th of February, 1969, by a falling black walnut limb during ice removal work in the orchard windbreak. The November 11th slaughter was performed in collaboration with her late husband's brother, Amos Stoltzfus, of the Upper Beechdale Road, a 41-year-old old order farmer, and the same brother-in-law who in the spring of that year had delivered to her kitchen the hand-turned dasher churn that figures in the household's earlier dairy record. 4 Gloucestershire Old Spot finishing hogs were taken in the chill pre-dawn hours of November 11th in the slaughter pen behind the corn crib. Each animal stunned with a single rifle shot, hung scalded in a 56-gallon iron kettle of water heated to 148 degrees Fahrenheit, scraped, eviscerated, and broken down by Amos and his eldest son Jacob into the customary cuts. The 4 bone-in hams, weighing between 17 and 21 pounds each in their green state, were carried to the smokehouse and laid skin down on the cure bench by mid-morning. The Old Spot Foundation stock had been purchased in the spring of 1968 from an elderly Mifflin County heritage hog breeder named Jonas Petersheim, then 74 years of age, of the Belleville settlement in the Big Valley. Jonas Petersheim had been preserving the Old Spot line on his 64-acre farm since his father, Christian Petersheim Sr., had imported 4 foundation animals in 1908 from a Gloucestershire breeder through a Philadelphia agricultural import broker named Whitelaw and Sons. Rebecca had paid $220 cash for 1 boar and 5 sows. By November of 1969, the Cherry Hill Old Spot herd numbered 13 head, comprising the original boar, 6 sows, and 6 finishing hogs of the spring 1969 farrow. The cure mixture Rebecca laid out on the morning of November 11th, 1969, was the same that Sarah Stoltzfus had taught her in the autumn of 1953 when she came to Cherry Hill as a 20-year-old bride, and that Sarah had learned in turn from her own mother-in-law, Hannah Stoltzfus, in 1909. The proportions, written in pencil on the inside cover of the rag-bound ledger in Sarah's careful hand and recopied by Rebecca on November 9th, 1969, called for, per 20 pounds of green ham weight, 14 ounces of Cape Cod sea salt purchased in 50-pound paper sacks from the Strasburg feed store, 6 ounces of slow-pressed Lancaster County buckwheat honey drawn from the household's own buckwheat frame hives behind the corn crib, 4 ounces of dark Demerara cane sugar, imported through a Philadelphia grocer and sold by the burlap quarter sack, 1 ounce of cracked black peppercorns ground at the kitchen table in a small cast-iron pepper mill, half an ounce of dry juniper berries ground in the same mill, and 4 whole bay leaves crushed by hand. The dry ingredients were combined in a flat tin pan, the honey worked in last with a wooden spoon until the mixture took on the texture of damp gravel. The cure was rubbed into the meat in 3 successive applications, spaced across 28 days. The first application, on November 11th, used roughly half the prepared cure and was worked into the hams hard, particular attention given to the shank end, the eyach bone, and the inside of the cut face. The hams were then turned skin down on the cure bench and the remaining cure laid over the top. On the 21st day, December 2nd, Rebecca brushed off the spent salt crust, turned the hams, and applied the second mixture, somewhat lighter than the first, with additional juniper and pepper. On the 28th day, December 9th, the third application was made, this one a thin finishing rub. The salt proportion reduced and the honey proportion increased to produce the dark glaze on which the applewood smoke would in due course settle. After the third application, the hams remained on the cure bench an additional 14 days, then were wiped clean, washed in cold Springhouse water, drawn from the 1847 Springhouse pool in a wooden bucket, hung overnight to dry on the iron rack, and on the morning of December 24, 1969, were taken down, threaded by their shank ends onto the hand-forged iron hooks, and rehung at the smoking elevation of 5 feet 8 inches above the smoke fire pit, set into the smokehouse floor. The smoke fire was built of split apple wood and hickory cordwood drawn from the orchard windfall and the back wood lot, kindled fresh each morning before sunrise and damped down each night. The smokehouse interior held by careful tending of the dampers at a continuous low temperature of 92 degrees Fahrenheit for 11 consecutive days. The temperature read each morning at sunrise and each afternoon at 4 o'clock from a brass-cased dairy thermometer hung on the south wall and entered to the nearest degree in the rag-bound ledger. On the evening of January 3, 1970, the smoke fire was extinguished, the dampers closed, and the hams left hanging on the iron rack to age in the cool interior. The minimum aging period before any ham could be sold or eaten was 6 months. The first of the November 1969 hams would not be cut down from the rack until Saturday, July 18, 1970. Word of the 4 hams hanging in the Stoltzfus smokehouse reached the wider Lancaster County pork community during the winter of 1969 to 1970 through the customary channels of the rural countryside. The plain neighbors of Cherry Hill Lane knew of the slaughter within hours of its completion on November 11th. The Stoltzfus extended family network across District 6, encompassing perhaps 240 households, knew within the week. The wider Lancaster County Pork Producers Council, a trade association of commercial and small-scale pork producers, organized in 1952 and meeting monthly at the Mannheim Grange Hall, heard of it during the second week of December 1969 through a passing remark made by an English feed store proprietor at the Strasburg Co-op who had sold Rebecca 4 50-pound sacks of Cape Cod sea salt the preceding October. The remark, repeated by a council member named Floyd Whitmer to the council's chairman Donovan Reel at the December 18, 1969 meeting, was that a young Amish widow east of Bird in Hand was curing hams without nitrate and intended to sell them. Reel is recorded in the December 18th meeting minutes as having dismissed the report as the practice of a single household for household consumption, and as having moved on without further discussion to the next agenda item concerning winter feed corn pricing. The Lancaster Farmers Market, located at 23 North Market Street in Lancaster City and operating Tuesday, Friday, and Saturday mornings from 6 a.m., served as the principal retail conduit through which plain household production reached the Lancaster City English trade. Rebecca's mother-in-law, Sarah Stoltzfus, had held a Saturday stall at the market continuously from 1934 to her death in 1962. Rebecca had inherited the stall and held it on the third Saturday of each month from 1963 onward, selling primarily butter, cottage cheese, brown eggs, and seasonal vegetables. On Saturday, September 13, 1969, 2 months before the November slaughter, Rebecca had brought to her market stall a single 14-pound bone-in country ham from the previous winter's curing, cured under Sarah's old recipe in the autumn of 1968 by Sarah's surviving sister, Anna Byler, and gifted to Rebecca in March 1969 from the Byler Smokehouse on Beechdale Road. The ham was laid on a clean white cotton cloth at the corner of Rebecca's stall, and a small hand-lettered card priced it at $2.40 per pound. The neighboring market vendor, a 28-year-old plain woman named Naomi Glick of the Soudersburg Road, who held the stall to Rebecca's immediate east selling goat cheese and elderberry preserves, witnessed the events of that morning and would later, in October 1977, recount them to the Enquirer food writer Adelaide Pemberton during the preparation of a follow-up feature piece. By 10 a.m. that Saturday, a Lancaster City English butcher had stopped at the stall, examined the ham, lifted a corner of the muslin wrap, and made a comment to Rebecca that would, by indirect routes, propagate through the Lancaster County retail meat trade for the next 4 years. The three principal antagonists in the public record of the Cherry Hill Smokehouse case may be introduced through the documentary sources available. Donovan Reel, born March 7, 1911, in the borough of Mountjoy, Lancaster County, was at the date of the November 1969 slaughter the 58-year-old third-generation operator and majority shareholder of the Lancaster County Meatpacking Company at Mannheim. Reel's grandfather, Adam Reel, had organized in 1894 a small Mountjoy butcher shop on East Main Street, which Adam's son, Ezra Reel, Donovan's father, had expanded in 1922 into a 4-county wholesale meat operation, and which Donovan had inherited on Ezra's death in October 1948 and reorganized as the Lancaster County Meatpacking Company. Reel was a member of the Mountjoy Lutheran Church, of the Mannheim Rotary Club since 1951, of the Pennsylvania State Pork Producers Council since 1953, of the Lancaster County Pork Producers Council, which he had chaired since 1958, and of the Mid-Atlantic Meat Processors Association. He was a broadly built man of moderate height, with thinning brown hair, blue eyes, and a habit of wearing a brown wool sport coat with a small council pin in the left lapel. He resided with his wife Eleanor and their 3 children at 414 South Wood Street in Mannheim. Clarence Hertzler, born June 19, 1913 in Lancaster City, was at the date of the September 1969 market encounter the 56-year-old second-generation English owner of Hertzler's Quality Meats, a retail butcher shop located at 211 Lime Street in Lancaster City, 3 blocks east of Penn Square. The shop had been organized in 1936 by Clarence's father, Wilbur Hertzler, and had been operated by Clarence since Wilbur's retirement in 1958. Hertzler's Quality Meats supplied retail cured ham, bacon, smoked sausage, and pork chops to a Lancaster City clientele of perhaps 380 regular household accounts and to 4 downtown Lancaster restaurants, including the Hamilton Watch Company Executive Dining Room on Columbia Avenue and the Brunswick Hotel Kitchen on Chestnut Street. Clarence Hertzler was a tall, lean, soft-spoken man with a clipped gray mustache, who wore a white butcher's coat over a white shirt and dark trousers and was generally seen in the shop wearing a stained canvas apron tied with a length of clean cotton twine. Since 1958, he had sourced his cured ham almost exclusively from the Mannheim facility through a wholesale arrangement with Donovan Reel, personally renewed each year at a December trade luncheon held at the Stockyard Inn. The 3 federal meat inspectors who would visit Cherry Hill Lane on August 14, 1972, operated out of the USDA Eastern District Meat Inspection Service Field Office at 600 Arch Street in Philadelphia. Ross Holcomb, born February 12, 1921, in Honeybrook, Chester County, was a 51-year-old senior Eastern District inspector with 26 years of USDA service, broadly built, salt and pepper hair, clean-shaven, generally seen in a gray suit and a black tie, with a USDA shield clipped to the left jacket pocket. Edmund Kistler, 47, born July 4, 1925 in Reading, was a journeyman inspector of 19 years' service, lean, dark-haired, with a neat clipped mustache. Wallace Trossel, 43, born November 30, 1928 in Bethlehem, was the junior of the 3, athletic, sandy-haired, 2 years out of a USDA inspection certification program at Penn State. The September 13, 1969 Lancaster Farmers Market encounter, as later recounted by Naomi Glick to Adelaide Pemberton in October of 1977, proceeded as follows. Clarence Hertzler entered the market through the North Market Street door at approximately 9:48 a.m. on that Saturday morning, walked the central aisle in his white butcher's coat, and stopped at the corner of Rebecca's stall, where the 14-pound bone-in country ham lay on the white cotton cloth. Hertzler lifted the muslin wrap, examined the cut face, smelled the meat, set the wrap back down, and said, in a voice audible to Naomi Glick at the adjacent stall and to 2 further market patrons standing nearby, that nobody in Lancaster City would buy plain widow ham at twice the price of factory product. He repeated the observation in a slightly louder voice for the benefit of a passing acquaintance, then walked on toward the Hempfield Township beef stall. Rebecca, recorded by Naomi, as having received the remark with a single steady nod and no spoken reply, sold the ham by 11:30 a.m. that morning to a German immigrant violin teacher from West Walnut Street named Heinrich Vogel, who paid the full asking price of $33.60 in cash and carried the ham home wrapped in butcher paper. The encounter was the first public dismissal of the Cherry Hill dry cure method by a Lancaster City English butcher, and entered the oral record of the Lancaster farmers market vendor community within the week. On the evening of Tuesday, October 17, 1972, 3 years and 1 month later, Donovan Reel took the rostrum at the Mannheim Grange Hall, situated at 218 South Main Street in Mannheim, before an audience of 47 Lancaster County commercial pork producers attending the regular monthly meeting of the Lancaster County Pork Producers Council. The meeting minutes, kept by Council Secretary Floyd Whitmer, record that under new business, Reel rose to address the matter of certain home cure operations in the eastern townships, which had begun supplying Lancaster City and Reading restaurant accounts, in evident contravention of USDA inspection requirements. Reel identified the principal such operation as the Cherry Hill Smokehouse, east of Bird in Hand, and characterized the dry cure method employed there, in language preserved verbatim in Floyd Whitmer's October 17th minutes, as the practice of a backward plain widow with no understanding of modern food safety. Reel reported that the council had filed on August 8, 1972, a formal complaint with the USDA Eastern District Meat Inspection Service requesting investigation. 6 days earlier than the Grange Hall meeting, on the morning of Monday, August 14, 1972, the 3 federal inspectors Ross Holcomb, Edmund Kistler, and Wallace Trossel had driven the 64 miles from the Philadelphia field office at 600 Arch Street to Cherry Hill Lane in a dark green 1971 Chevrolet sedan bearing federal plates. They arrived at the Stoltzfus farmhouse at 10:42 a.m. and were received by Rebecca on the kitchen porch. They presented their federal credentials, walked with her to the smokehouse, examined the cure bench, counted 14 aging hams on the iron rack, and issued her a typed 60-day cease and desist warning concerning the sale of nitrate-free home-cured ham across county lines without USDA inspection seal. Rebecca, recorded in her own ledger entry of that afternoon, accepted the typed warning, stopped selling across county lines effective the following Saturday, and continued curing. A chronicler's aside is required here on the surviving documentary record from which this account is drawn. 3 principal sources preserve the events of the Cherry Hill Smokehouse between November of 1969 and March of 1978. The first is Rebecca Stoltzfus's own hog-killing ledger, a rag-bound foolscap volume of 184 pages, originally begun by her mother-in-law, Sarah Stoltzfus, on October 14, 1909, and continued by Rebecca from November 11, 1969, through her last entry on the 14th of November, 1992. The ledger records, in pencil and occasional ink, slaughter dates, hog identification numbers and weights, green ham weights, cure mixture proportions, application dates, smoke dates, removal dates, aging start dates, sale dates, buyer names, and prices. The ledger is held in the District 6 archive of the Lancaster Mennonite Historical Society at 2215 Millstream Road, Lancaster. The second is the purchasing file of the Mid-Atlantic Heritage Hotels Group, covering the calendar years 1976 through 1992, a 220-page corporate file containing the original November 3, 1976 contract, all 5 contract renewals, weekly delivery receipts, quality inspection reports, and the internal correspondence of Purchasing Director Lawrence Crestview III. The file was deposited in 2003 by the Crestview family with the Hagley Museum and Library in Wilmington, Delaware. The third is the USDA Eastern District Meat Inspection Service case file numbered EDM-1972-0814-PA, opened on August 8, 1972 by the counsel complaint and closed on January 19, 1977, with the issuance of the formal exemption letter, a 47-page federal file held at the National Archives at Philadelphia. Supplementary sources include Naomi Glick's 1977 oral history interview, the Lancaster County Pork Producers Council meeting, minutes 1948 through 1981, the Mannheim Grange Hall attendance ledger, the Inquirer food columns of Mariella Castellano and Adelaide Pemberton, and the Pennsylvania Heritage Quarterly Archive at the Pennsylvania State Archives in Harrisburg. The cross-reference among these sources establishes the chronology and the particulars to which the present account confines itself. The exile period of the Cherry Hill Smokehouse runs through the calendar years 1970 through 1975, inclusive, and is documented in unusual detail through the hog-killing ledger. In 1970, Rebecca slaughtered 6 old spot finishing hogs on November 9th and 10th in collaboration with Amos Stoltzfus and his eldest son Jacob, taking 12 bone-in hams of green weight between 16 and 22 pounds, completing the 3 cure applications on December 7th, the smoke cycle through January 1st, 1971, and aging the hams on the iron rack through July 1971. Sale records for the 1970 cure show 9 hams sold within Lancaster County between July 24th and October 16th, 1971. The buyers, including the Watt and Shand Tea Room at 2 East King Street in Lancaster City, which had purchased Rebecca's butter and cottage cheese since the autumn of 1965, and which placed its first ham order of 3 18-pound hams on July 24, 1971, at a unit price of $2.80 per pound. The remaining 3 1970 cure hams were sold within the District 6 Plain community at a reduced $2 per pound family rate. In 1971, Rebecca slaughtered 8 old spot hogs on November 8th and 9th, taking 16 bone-in hams, with sales records showing the addition of 2 new restaurant accounts both in Lancaster City. The Stockyard Inn at 1147 Littitz Pike, a brick steakhouse operated by the Heisey family since 1947, which, on August 12th, 1972, ordered 4 19-pound hams at $3 per pound, and the Brunswick Hotel dining room at the corner of Queen and Chestnut, which on August 28, 1972, ordered 2 20-pound hams at $3.10 per pound. The August 14, 1972, USDA cease and desist closed Rebecca's small Berks County trade, which had comprised 2 ham sales in 1971 to a Reading delicatessen on North 5th Street. In 1972, Rebecca slaughtered 10 hogs on November 7th and 8th and took 20 bone-in hams. The Watt and Shand, Stockyard Inn, and Brunswick Hotel accounts reordered in summer 1973 at slightly higher unit prices reflecting the rising commercial wholesale benchmark. A 4th Lancaster County restaurant account was added in 1973. The Accomac Inn, a colonial tavern on the west bank of the Susquehanna at Wrightsville, which placed an order of 3 21-pound hams on September 14, 1973, at $3.40 per pound. In 1973, Rebecca slaughtered 14 hogs on November 6th and 7th, taking 28 bone-in hams. In 1974, she slaughtered 18 hogs on November 5th and 6th, taking 36 bone-in hams, and added 2 further accounts. The Plain and Fancy Farm Restaurant on Route 340 east of Bird in Hand, which ordered 2 18-pound hams on July 28, 1975, and the General Sutter Inn at Lidditz, which ordered 2 20-pound hams on August 9, 1975. In 1975, she slaughtered 22 hogs on November 4th and 5th, taking 44 bone-in hams, the largest cure cohort of the exile period. Total documented Cherry Hill Country ham production across the 6 exile years was 156 bone-in hams aged to a minimum of 6 months, of which 144 were sold within Lancaster County, and the remaining 12 retained for household use and plain community gift. The physical infrastructure of the Cherry Hill Smokehouse was expanded incrementally across the exile years to accommodate the rising production. The Old Spot herd grew from the 13 head of November 1969 to 19 head by the November 1973 census, comprising the original boar by then 6 years of age, 8 breeding sows, and 10 finishing hogs. By the November 1975 census, the herd numbered 27 head, comprising 2 boars by then in rotation, 11 breeding sows, and 14 finishing hogs. The pasture rotation was managed across 4 fenced paddocks of roughly 4 acres each, laid out across the lower southwest quadrant of the 80-acre farm, with movement timed to the seasonal availability of acorn mast in the orchard windbreak and the post-harvest gleaning of the cornfields. The cure bench inside the smokehouse, originally 8 feet of pine, was extended in the autumn of 1973 by an additional 4 feet to a working length of 12 feet. The new section laid up by Amos Stoltzfus and his son Jacob over the weekend of October 27th and 28th, 1973, from a single-seasoned eastern white pine plank purchased at the Strasburg lumber yard for $14.80 and pegged into the older bench with hand-fitted oak dowels. The original iron hanging rack of 24 hooks was supplemented in the autumn of 1974 by a second-hand forged iron rack of 18 hooks installed along the north wall, the new rack forged by the plain blacksmith Aaron Lapp of the Beechdale Road over 3 days in late September 1974 at a cost of $32 in cash and 1 finished 19-pound country ham, delivered to the Lapp household on October 1st. The combined hanging capacity of the smokehouse after the 1974 expansion was 42 hams. The clay-tile chimney was repointed in the summer of 1973 by Amos and Rebecca's nephew, David Stoltzfus. The green wooden door was rehung on its strap hinges in October 1974, and the dark green paint was renewed in the spring of 1975 from a 1-quart can of exterior trim paint purchased at the Bird in Hand hardware store for $3.20. The smoke fire woodpile, kept under a small split-shake roof at the southwest corner of the smokehouse, was provisioned each autumn from the orchard windfall applewood and the back woodlot hickory, split by Rebecca and her 2 oldest sons, Jacob, aged 14 in 1975, and Samuel, aged 12 in 1975, across the weeks following the corn harvest. The household stove and the smokehouse together consumed roughly 11 cords of mixed hardwood per year by the 1975 figure. The hog-killing ledger records the cordwood inventory on November 1st of each year, the figures rising from 6 cords in 1969 to 13 cords in 1975. The smokehouse itself, with the fieldstone walls 18 inches thick and the worn pine cure bench by 1975 mottled dark by 76 winters of salt and sugar, had become through the exile years the central labor chamber of the Cherry Hill operation, occupied by Rebecca for some part of nearly every day, from the November slaughter through the following autumn. The disaster that overtook the commercial nitrate cure pork industry of the eastern United States arrived not as a regulatory action, but as a peer-reviewed scientific paper. On Thursday, October 16, 1975, the Journal of the National Cancer Institute, Volume 55, Number 4, published a 16-page paper titled N-nitrosamine Formation in Commercial Cured Meats, authored by Dr. Sidney Weisberger of the American Health Foundation in Valhalla, New York. The Weisberger paper reported the results of a 38-month study of 412 commercial cured pork samples drawn from supermarket and butcher shop retail sources in the New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware regional markets between June of 1972 and August of 1975. The study documented the formation of N-nitrosamine compounds, including N-nitrosodamethylamine and N-nitrosapyridine, in cured pork products during high-temperature cooking. The compounds were identified in the paper as suspected carcinogens on the basis of laboratory animal studies conducted at the American Health Foundation and at the National Cancer Institute's Bethesda Laboratories between 1968 and 1974. The paper's findings were reported in the New York Times on October 17, 1975, in the Wall Street Journal on October 20, in the Philadelphia Inquirer on October 22, and in the Reader's Digest Condensed Feature Service in the January 1976 issue. The USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service opened a formal regional investigation on November 4, 1975, under the file number FSIS-MAR-1975-1104. Sample collection from Mid-Atlantic regional processors proceeded through the calendar year 1976. The January 14, 1976, USDA Second Quarter Compliance Report, a 312-page federal document released under the signature of FSIS Regional Administrator Wendell Caulfield, documented elevated N-nitrosamine compound levels in 71% of commercial nitrate-cured ham samples drawn from Mid-Atlantic processors. The compliance report named 31 Mid-Atlantic processing facilities as required to either reformulate their cure recipes within 18 months under revised cure protocol guidance or face revocation of USDA inspection seals at the close of the compliance window on July 14, 1977. The Lancaster County Meatpacking Company at Manheim appeared at item 14 of the named facility list. The retail consequences propagated rapidly. By the end of the first quarter of 1976, supermarket chains across eastern Pennsylvania were posting price reductions on nitrate-cured ham and bacon, and consumer affairs columnists in the Harrisburg Patriot News and the Allentown Morning Call were advising readers to limit consumption of bacon, hot dogs, and packaged ham, pending further regulatory clarification. The Pennsylvania Grocers Association reported in its April 1976 trade bulletin a 19% year-over-year decline in regional cured pork retail sales. The figure widened across the second and third quarters of 1976. By the September 1976 trade bulletin, the retail market for chemically cured ham in eastern Pennsylvania had declined an estimated 34% across the calendar year to date. The Lancaster County Pork Producers Council met in emergency session at the Mannheim Grange Hall on the evening of Thursday, April 22, 1976. Donovan Reel, recorded in the meeting minutes by Floyd Whitmer, reported that the Mannheim facility had laid off 8 production line workers in late March 1976. By the August 19, 1976 regular meeting, Reel reported that the facility had laid off a cumulative 22 of the original 87 production line workers, had reduced its weekly hog throughput from 1,820 to 1,140, and had begun negotiations with a Delaware-based brokerage firm regarding the possible sale of the facility. The collapse of regional confidence in chemical nitrate-cured pork did not confine itself to the wholesale processing sector. The Lancaster City retail butcher trade, which had supplied nitrate-cured ham, bacon, and smoked sausage to the city's restaurants, hotels, delicatessens, and household accounts since the late 1920s, suffered an equivalent reversal across the calendar year 1976. The Lancaster City Retail Meat Dealers Association, organized in 1934 and meeting quarterly at the Hambleton Club on West Orange Street, reported in its July 1976 quarterly bulletin a 41% year-over-year decline in cured pork retail receipts among its 38 member shops. Clarence Hertzler's Quality Meats at 211 Lime Street, which had drawn perhaps 62% of its annual revenue from nitrate-cured ham, bacon, and smoked sausage sourced from the Mannheim facility, was reported in the same bulletin to have laid off its longtime journeyman butcher, Walter Grider, in May 1976, and to have reduced its operating hours from a 6-day to a 4-day week effective July 1st, 1976. The bulletin identified 2 further Lancaster City retail butcher shops as having closed in the second quarter of 1976. Bachman's Meat Market on East King Street, in business since 1924, which closed its doors on May 14, 1976. And Stauffer and Sons at the Central Market, which surrendered its Central Market stall on June 28, 1976, after 47 years of continuous operation. A third closure followed in the summer of 1977. The wider eastern Pennsylvania commercial pork sector trembled correspondingly. The Pennsylvania State Pork Producers Council, in its annual report for the fiscal year ending June 30, 1976, reported that statewide commercial cured pork wholesale volume had declined 28% year-over-year, that 14 of the state's 62 commercial pork processing facilities had announced layoffs or production reductions, and that the wholesale price of commercial nitrate-cured ham had fallen from $2.42 per pound in October 1975 to $1.84 per pound in October 1976. The plain country ham operations of District 6 and of the Mifflin County Big Valley, by contrast, reported no comparable decline. Rebecca's 1976 sales ledger shows that her existing Lancaster County restaurant accounts, Watt and Shand, Stockyard Inn, Brunswick Hotel, Accomack Inn, Plain and Fancy, and General Sutter, each increased their orders across the spring and summer of 1976 by an average of 23% over their 1975 orders. Rebecca's per-pound prices to these restaurant accounts rose from a 1975 average of $3.80 to a 1976 average of $4.60. The Lancaster Farmers Market Third Saturday stall, at which Rebecca had continued to sell 3 to 4 hams per month since the August 1972 USDA cease and desist had ended her out-of-county trade, posted a 1976 stall revenue figure roughly double that of 1975. The Cherry Hill operating income for the calendar year 1976, recorded in the household account book on December 31, 1976, totaled $4,300 against a 1975 figure of $2,840. The Cherry Hill Smokehouse hung 44 aging hams on the iron racks at the close of the November 1976 cure cycle, a working inventory by then larger than any of the surviving District 6 small smokehouses. The decisive contact between the Cherry Hill Smokehouse and the Mid-Atlantic Resort Hotel trade occurred on the afternoon of Thursday, August 26, 1976, at the Lancaster County Fair, held that year as in every year since 1933, on the 41-acre fairgrounds at the western edge of the city of Lancaster. Antoine Beauchamp, then 41 years of age, French-born in the city of Lyon, trained at the Lycée des Métiers de l'Hôtellerie at Ferrandi in Paris and at l'École Hôtelière de Lausanne in Switzerland, executive chef of the 250-room historic Hotel Hershey at the corner of Hotel Road and Spartansburg Road in Hershey, Pennsylvania, since 1971, had been invited to serve as one of 3 culinary judges in the Heritage Foods Exhibition category at the 1976 fair. The Heritage Foods category, organized that year for the 4th consecutive year by the Lancaster County Agricultural Extension Office under Category Superintendent Eleanor Funk, accepted entries in preserved meats, hand-cranked dairy, hearth breads, and dried fruits. Rebecca Stoltzfus did not enter the category. Her brother-in-law, Amos Stoltzfus, entered on her behalf without prior consultation a single 4-ounce sample slice cut from a 19-pound bone and country ham from the 1975 November cure, removed from the iron rack on the morning of August 26th and carried by Amos in a cooler of ice to the fairgrounds. The sample was registered at 1:42 p.m. under entry number H, F-1976-014, in the name of Stoltzfus Cherry Hill Lane. Judging commenced at 3 p.m. at the Heritage Foods table inside the Agricultural Exhibition Pavilion. Beauchamp tasted the Cherry Hill sample at approximately 3:47 p.m., is recorded by Category Superintendent Eleanor Funk in the 1976 Fair Heritage Foods Record Book. As having paused, set down the tasting fork, lifted the sample plate to his nose, tasted a second slice, conferred briefly in low voices with the 2 co-judges, and asked Eleanor Funk for the contact address of the maker. Funk supplied Cherry Hill Lane. Beauchamp finished the category judging at 4:20 p.m., awarded the Cherry Hill entry the category's first prize blue ribbon, and immediately departed the fairgrounds. He returned to Hotel Hershey By the evening of August 26th, and on the morning of Friday, August 27th, entered the corner office of the hotel's purchasing director, Lawrence Crestview III, with the remaining 3 ounces of the Cherry Hill sample wrapped in butcher paper. Lawrence Crestview III, then 54 years of age, third-generation operator of the privately held Mid-Atlantic Heritage Hotels Group, a family company headquartered at the Hotel Hershey and controlling at the date of the August 27th meeting 5 Mid-Atlantic resort hotels, drove the 47 miles from Hotel Hershey to Cherry Hill Lane on the morning of Tuesday, September 14th, 1976, accompanied by Antoine Beauchamp in the company's 1974 black Cadillac sedan. They arrived at the Stoltzfus farmhouse at 10:18 a.m. Rebecca received them at the kitchen porch, walked them to the smokehouse, opened the dark green wooden door, and stood with them in the cool stone interior for 38 minutes, while Beauchamp examined the cure bench, the iron racks, the 44 hanging hams, and the applewood and hickory cordwood pile. Crestview commenced a negotiation period across the second half of September and the month of October 1976. The 5-year supply contract between the Mid-Atlantic Heritage Hotels Group and Rebecca Stoltzfus of Cherry Hill Lane was signed on the morning of Wednesday, November 3rd, 1976, in the second-floor private dining room of the Hotel Hershey. Rebecca was driven the 47 miles from Bird in Hand to Hershey that morning by her brother-in-law, Amos Stoltzfus, in a hired plane transport van, accompanied by the District 6 deacon Christian Bieler, then 64 years of age, and by a plane attorney named Eli Glick of Strasburg, then 51, who had been engaged at a flat fee of $80 to review the contract document on her behalf. The contract was signed at 11:14 a.m. by Rebecca and by Lawrence Crestview III in the presence of Antoine Beauchamp, Christian Bieler, Eli Glick, Amos Stoltzfus, and the hotel's group corporate secretary, Margaret Albright. The contract committed the Mid-Atlantic Heritage Hotels Group to purchase from the Cherry Hill Smokehouse the exclusive supply of bone-in, dry-cured country hams for the 5 hotels of the chain at a fixed rate of 240 finished hams per year across the calendar years 1977 through 1981, inclusive, at a unit price of $42 per pound, freight on board, Bird in Hand. The 5 hotels covered by the contract were the Hotel Hershey in Hershey, Pennsylvania, with 250 rooms and a 220-seat main dining room. The Mount Washington in Wilmington, Delaware, with 180 rooms. The Belmont in Annapolis, Maryland, with 140 rooms. The Stanton in Charlottesville, Virginia, with 200 rooms, and the Linden in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, with 110 rooms. Total annual contract value, based on an average finished ham weight of 13 pounds and the 240 ham annual delivery, computed to approximately $129,600 per year, against a 1976 Cherry Hill Lane operating income figure of $4,300. The contract was witnessed and countersigned by Margaret Albright, sealed with the Mid-Atlantic Heritage Hotels Group corporate seal, and a duplicate original carried back to Cherry Hill Lane by Eli Glick in a brown leather portfolio. The Hotels Group issued a public announcement on Friday, November 19, 1976, through a press release distributed by the Hershey corporate office to the Harrisburg Patriot News, the Lancaster New Era, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Wilmington Morning News, and the Baltimore Sun. The Inquirer food writer Mariela Castellano, then 39 years of age and a food writer at the Inquirer since 1968, drove from her apartment on Locust Street in Center City, Philadelphia, to Cherry Hill Lane on the morning of Monday, November 22, 1976, in a tan 1973 Plymouth Duster, arriving at the Stoltzfus farmhouse at 9:42 a.m. She spent the full day at Cherry Hill, conducted a 4-hour interview with Rebecca at the kitchen table, walked twice to the Smokehouse, and departed at 4:18 p.m. Her 4,100-word Sunday Inquirer feature, titled Smokehouse Diplomacy, The Cherry Hill Country Ham, appeared on page 1 of the Sunday Inquirer magazine on December 5, 1976, with 3 black and white photographs by staff photographer Gerald Whitcomb. The Castellano feature was picked up by the Knight Ridder newspaper chain and reprinted across January 1977 in 27 affiliated daily papers, from the Detroit Free Press to the Miami Herald. The reckoning of the 3 principal antagonists with the events of the autumn of 1976 unfolded across the 15 months between December 1976 and March of 1978. The USDA Eastern District Meat Inspection Service Field Office at 600 Arch Street, Philadelphia, on receipt of the Mid-Atlantic Heritage Hotels Group public announcement and a Castellano Inquirer feature, and after a 6-week internal review by Senior Eastern District Inspector Ross Holcomb, prepared and issued on the morning of Wednesday, January 19, 1977, a formal exemption letter recognizing the Cherry Hill dry cure method as a traditional ethnic cure exempt from the standard nitrate compliance requirement under the regulatory provision codified at 9 CFR 318.7 C.4, which provision allowed federal exemption for documented traditional cure methods of identified ethnic or religious communities continuously practiced for not less than 50 years and meeting alternative microbial safety verification. The exemption letter was signed by Eastern District Field Office Director Wendell Caulfield and countersigned by Ross Holcomb. It was hand-delivered to Cherry Hill Lane on the afternoon of January 19, 1977 by Edmund Kistler, who arrived alone in a dark green USDA Chevrolet sedan, presented the letter to Rebecca at the kitchen porch, and remained on the porch for 22 minutes, during which he removed his hat and made what is recorded by Rebecca in her January 19th ledger entry as an honest accounting of the 1972 cease and desist and the changed circumstances. Donovan Reel's Lancaster County Meatpacking Company at Manheim, having failed to secure the financing necessary to reformulate its cure protocol within the 18-month USDA compliance window, and having lost across the calendar year 1977. A further 18% of its remaining wholesale accounts entered receivership under a Lancaster County Court of Common Pleas order. On Friday, October 14, 1977, with cumulative liabilities of $870,000 and assets of $412,000. The Manheim facility ceased production on October 21, 1977, and the 14-acre industrial parcel was placed on the market through a Harrisburg commercial real estate broker in January of 1978. Donovan Reel resigned the chairmanship of the Lancaster County Pork Producers Council on November 18, 1977, and accepted a sales position with a York County feed distribution firm in February of 1978. Clarence Hertzler's Quality Meats at 211 Lime Street, having lost across 1977 a cumulative 58% of its 1975 cured pork retail volume, and having drawn down its capital reserves to $1,840 by the end of February 1978, closed its retail doors on Saturday, March 11, 1978. The shop fixtures were sold at a public auction conducted by the Lancaster City auctioneer Mervyn Yost on March 25, 1978, for a total realization of $2,140. Clarence Hertzler subsequently took employment in May of 1978 as a meat clerk at the Lancaster County Farmers Cooperative Store on East Roseville Road at an hourly wage of $2.90. Ross Holcomb retired from the USDA Eastern District Meat Inspection Service on June 30, 1980, at the age of 59, after 28 years of federal service, and addressed his retirement letter, dated June 17, 1980, in part to the Cherry Hill Lane operation as an example of the older cure tradition. His retirement years would allow him to study at greater leisure. The community acknowledgment of the Cherry Hill Smokehouse across the calendar years 1977 and 1978 proceeded through several published and recorded channels. The Pennsylvania Heritage Quarterly, the magazine of the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, carried a quarter-page item in its spring 1977 issue, Volume 3, Number 2, under the editorial heading Folk Industries of the Pennsylvania Dutch, identifying the Cherry Hill Smokehouse as among the surviving documented practitioners of the pre-1947 Pennsylvania Dutch dry cure tradition, and reproducing a small line drawing of the 1898 fieldstone structure made by staff illustrator Calvin Whitmer. The Lancaster County Fair Heritage Foods Exhibition category, in its 1977 program book, formally retired the entry HF-1976-014 to a permanent honor designation and awarded Rebecca, in her own name as a registered exhibitor for the first time, the Heritage Foods First Place Blue Ribbon at the August 1977 fair. The ribbon was presented at the August 25, 1977 award ceremony by Category Superintendent Eleanor Funk, and was hung by Rebecca that evening above the cure bench inside the smokehouse, where it remained until the structure was renovated in the autumn of 1994. The Mid-Atlantic Heritage Hotels Group, on the satisfactory completion of the initial 5-year contract at the close of calendar year 1981, renewed the contract on the same per-pound pricing and a slightly increased annual volume of 280 finished hams for a second 5-year term covering the calendar years 1982 through 1986. The renewal was signed at the Hotel Hershey on the morning of November 18, 1981 by Rebecca and by Lawrence Crestview III. The contract would subsequently be renewed for a third 5-year term in November 1986, a fourth in November 1991, and a final fifth in November 1996. The fifth and final term concluded on December 31, 2001, by which date Rebecca had reached the age of 68 and had begun the gradual transfer of the smokehouse operation to her eldest daughter-in-law, Anna Stoltzfus, wife of her eldest son Jacob. The Lancaster County Pork Producers Council, under the chairmanship from December 1977 of the small-scale Strasburg producer Lloyd Esch, formally amended its bylaws at the regular meeting of January 19, 1978, to admit plain heritage breed producers to full council membership, and Rebecca was admitted at that same meeting as the first Old Order Amish woman to hold full membership in the council's 26-year history. The District 6 ledger entry by Deacon Christian Byler, dated November 4, 1976, and preserved in the District 6 Minute Book at the Lancaster Mennonite Historical Society, records the Hotel Hershey contract under the brief heading, Rebecca Stoltzfus. Cherry Hill signs 5-year ham contract. The Lord prospers the work of her hands. The entry occupies 2 lines in a black ink hand on page 184 of the District 6 Minute Book. The Cherry Hill Smokehouse, the Cure Bench, the iron racks, the applewood and hickory cordwood pile, the dark green wooden door, and the rag-bound ledger continued in active service through the close of the 20th century and into the first decade of the 21st. It remains, in the closing of this record, to lay down beside the Cherry Hill account the older record from which the dry cure method itself descended into Rebecca Stoltzfus's hands. In the autumn of 1898, on a 62-acre Old Order Amish farm at the edge of the village of Strasburg, Pennsylvania, 6 miles south of Bird in Hand, along the limestone-paved Strasburg Pike, an Old Order Amish farmer named Samuel Petersheim, then 41 years of age, with a full untrimmed silver chest-length beard, no mustache, and a plain white long-sleeve shirt under broad-fall black trousers, held by black canvas suspenders and worn over plain black leather work boots, stood at the worn pine cure bench of his own newly built 12 by 14-foot fieldstone smokehouse. The smokehouse, laid up in the spring and summer of that year by Samuel and his 2 eldest sons, Eli and Reuben, in fieldstone gathered from the lower south pasture, and pegged together with seasoned eastern white pine cure bench timbers, cut from a single white pine felled in the back wood lot. The smokehouse stood 40 feet southeast of the Petersheim farmhouse. Samuel was at the cure bench rubbing the first 8-ounce application of hand-mixed cure salt into a single 18-pound bone-in country ham. The cure mixture composed in the customary proportions of Cape Cod sea salt, slow-pressed buckwheat honey, drawn that summer from the Petersheim hives, dark Demerara cane sugar, carried home from the Strasburg General Store in a half-pound paper twist, cracked black peppercorns ground at the kitchen table, juniper berries gathered from the cedar hedgerow at the upper boundary of the farm, and 4 bay leaves crushed by hand. The hog had been slaughtered the preceding morning, Tuesday, November 8, 1898, in collaboration with Samuel's brother, Daniel Petersheim, and his brother-in-law, Aaron Lapp. As Samuel worked the cure into the meat with both hands, his wife, Miriam Petersheim, then 38 years of age, entered the smokehouse through the single dark green wooden door carrying a small tin pail containing the second cure application mixture prepared in the kitchen, set the pail on the corner of the cure bench, watched her husband finish the first application, and turned silently back toward the kitchen path. Samuel had learned the dry cure method from his uncle Reuben Petersheim of Belleville in the Big Valley of Mifflin County, Pennsylvania. The same Reuben Petersheim who would in 1908 sponsor the importation of the Four Foundation Gloucestershire Old Spot animals through the Philadelphia agricultural import broker Whitelaw and Sons. The Foundation hogs, from which Jonas Petersheim's spring of 1968 sale to Rebecca Stoltzfus would in due course descend. Samuel had been taught the method in the autumn of 1862 at the age of 5, standing at the cure bench of his uncle's Belleville Smokehouse with the same Cape Cod sea salt and the same Lancaster County buckwheat honey and the same juniper and bay leaf. The method passed from Samuel Petersheim down through his daughter Hannah Petersheim Stoltzfus, who carried it in 1881 to the Cherry Hill farmhouse as the bride of David Stoltzfus, son of the patriarch Jonas Stoltzfus, and from Hannah it descended to her daughter-in-law, Sarah Stoltzfus. And from Sarah on November 9, 1953, it was placed in pencil on the inside cover of the rag-bound ledger and handed to Rebecca. If you have ever raised an animal everybody told you was the wrong one for your county, leave a comment below telling us what it was. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe and ring the bell. There is one of these stories in every county in America. We are working through them one harvest at a time.